namely the realization that slowing aging down is actually not the easiest way to postpone the health problems of late life. That the easiest way is to repair aging, to reverse aging. There are lots of ways to estimate biological age. Some of them are very long-standing. VO2 max is part of this, measuring memory, measuring strength, like grip strength, measuring how fast you can walk, your glucose tolerance, things like that. And these are all good estimates of some aspects of biological age. We have to see a shift in the kinds of medicines that will be provided from small molecules, pharmaceuticals, into regenerative medicine, cell therapies, gene therapies. Now, a lot of the misunderstanding of the pharmaceutical industry that exists in society is thinking, well, okay, big pharma, the medical industry, they make their money out of sick people. They want to extend sick care rather than health care. They don't really want preventative medicine. But that's not really true. It's the public that don't want preventative medicine because they're very bad at reasoning with uncertainty. And they think that, things that are new and are simply applied to people who are not yet sick is going to hurt them. And we definitely feel that we've validated the belief that we had in starting all of this work, that these are the right experiments to be doing right now. And not just the right experiments, they are the single most valuable experiments that could be done in the whole of biology of aging, in terms of the amount of information we could acquire per dollar spent. And not just information, but also impact, rhetorical information, if you like, the ability to actually get the public to sit up and take notice and realize that they can no longer cling to the idea that aging is immutable.
Dr. Aubrey de Grey, Dr. Kelsey Moody, welcome to Your Health Matters. How you guys doing?
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. Yeah, it's great to have you here. When you Google aging experts, top 10, guess whose name shows up? ChatGPT, Google, Dr. Aubrey de Grey. So it's a real honor to, first of all, to meet you, have you here. In your book, it's outstanding. Ending Aging, I just love it. And our audience, and the stations, the shows that I have in these different markets, average age 50 plus, probably more on the plus side of that. We're all interested. I'm 63. We're interested in, how can we live longer, live better? And you're a pioneer in the research here. So, can you tell me a little bit about the work you do, the SENS Foundation, SENS Research, and how did you get started in this? I'm really curious about that because I didn't start getting interested in living healthy till about 15 years ago. So I got a lot of repair to do still.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame that so many people don't actually start thinking about what's going to happen to them in the long run until they're already quite close to that.
Yeah.
I actually didn't get into this field until I was about 30, and a lot of the people who are big movers and shakers in longevity were, really committed to it when they were much younger than that. But what I do is actually, so the foundation you mentioned, Sense Research Foundation, is not my current organization. That's my previous organization, and there's a bit of a story behind that, which I will not tell. Okay. The organization I have now, which is the organization under the auspices of which I work closely with Kelsey, though his organization was also a spin out from my previous organization, it's called LEV Foundation. LEV stands for Longevity Escape Velocity, which is a concept that I put forward maybe 20 years ago to describe the level, but the level to which we need to bring aging under comprehensive medical control in order to basically be done, in order to basically say we've done the hard part. And I believe that we have at least a 50-50 chance of getting to that point within the next 12 to 15 years from now. So that's very relevant to people who are alive today or even people who are your age or mine, because this is going to benefit people who are already in middle age or older at that time. So you and I will be in our 70s, our late 70s. And, we've got a good chance of benefiting from that, especially since certainly I am pretty biologically young for my age, and I have a feeling you probably are too. So what do? We do early stage research. So we do laboratory work. We don't work in the clinic with human beings. We leave that to other people. We give people who work in the clinic the information, the knowledge with which to do the right thing. So what we're doing is figuring out what is going on in simpler, shorter-lived organisms, especially mice. The mice that most people normally work with and we work with, they live about 2.5 years. So we're interested in making them live longer. And of course, we are interested in making them live healthier for longer, so that so we have information that can be eventually translated to human beings. And we recognize, based on the work that I've done over the past 25 years, that the way we're going to do that is by a divide and conquer approach, by taking a lot of different types of damage that the body does to itself throughout life and figuring out how to repair those types of damage with targeted interventions, targeted treatments, so that we can then combine those treatments. We can give them all to the same mice at the same time and get more than the sum of the parts. One thing I want to point out that people often get wrong here is there is no such thing as a natural limit to lifespan. Lifespan is simply a side effect of health. So basically that means that the better we get at keeping people healthy, the longer they're going to live. Mm-hmm. Some people are scared of that. They say, oh dear, how will we pay the pensions, or where are we going to put all the people and so on. But that's honestly wrong-headed. You should not be thinking that way. The fact is, health is a boon. Nobody wants to be sick, however long ago they were born. And longevity as a side effect of health is a side effect that we should be celebrating, not in any way, apologizing for or being scared of.
Uh-huh. I love how you said side effect of life, longevity. I forget how you said it. Okay, yeah, I was going to write it down, but then I get distracted and I miss things. So I'll re-listen and write it down later, but that is really interesting. It seems to me like there's a lot of research going on in general of what's happening at a cellular level. Okay, so I want to make it very clear. I'm not a doctor. I'm not educated in this area, but I talk with people a lot. I read these books. I read your book. The cellular level looks really, really interesting to me. I wonder if, for example, a damage repair, we look at damage repair, an approach like that, let's say, well, let me just lead in with that. Maybe talk about that a little bit. What is damage repair?
Yeah. Well, damage repair is, in the human body, absolutely, or in the mouse body for that matter, absolutely at the molecular and cellular level, at the microscopic level. There are some types of damage which are in the form of cells dying, cells that we need, dying and not being automatically replaced by other cells. So that's simply a loss of cells. It's the equivalent to, tiles coming off your roof, right?
Sure.
Then there's types of damage which constitute having too many cells that you don't want, bad cells. So that can be because they're dividing when they're not supposed to. That's pretty much the definition of cancer.
Cancer, yeah.
Or there's cases where they're not dividing, but they are actively toxic. They're secreting nasty things, and the body is trying but failing to kill those cells off. These are often called senescent cells. There are various types of senescent cells, but that's a word that's often used. So we want to help the body to get rid of those cells. And then there are things at the molecular level, things, waste products that accumulate in cells, inside the cell and also outside the cell in the spaces between cells. You've got a bunch of different types of damage. And that's why it's a divide and conquer problem, which will yield to a divide and conquer solution with a lot of different treatments being given to the same people at the same time.
Okay. When I look at senescent cells, is this a cause of inflammation?
Okay. So you've got to be a bit careful with the word inflammation. Okay. Inflammation is a programmed thing, something that we have genes for, something that the body does because it can. And so we have to ask, why does the body have this capability at all? And the answer is because inflammation, the inflammatory response, is a big part of how we control infections, how we get rid of infections.
Sure.
difficulty is that within aging, you have a lot of cases where the immune system is, if you like, misdirected. It is activated against things that it's unable to get rid of. So the bacteria that it's activated against, fine, it destroys the bacteria, and then there may be collateral damage that was done, and that collateral damage can be mopped up after the fact. If the thing that it's targeted against is something it can't destroy, and this happens with indigestible molecules sometimes, like amyloid, for example, then it just carried on getting worse, trying and failing, and doing more and more collateral damage. So that's the kind of thing that we want to stop happening. And one approach is to just dampen the whole inflammatory response overall, but that's not terribly smart because, of course, it also means that the inflammatory response is less able to attack bacteria. So the right thing to do, is to attack the target, to get rid of the thing that the inflammatory response is being mistargeted against, and then the inflammatory response will sort itself out on its own.
Wow. Yeah, this is really, really interesting. I have so many other questions for you. So right now we're going to head out to a break. Appreciate everybody listening. This is Your Health Matters. My name is Carl Sterling. My guests today, Dr. Aubrey de Grey, Dr. Kelsey Moody. We'll be back after this short break. All right, we're back. And so Dr. de Grey, this is really interesting stuff. And Dr. Moody, I'm curious, Kelsey. You have a lot of work going on in the lab and other things. Tell us about the work you're doing.
Sure. So I'm the CEO and founder of iCore Life Sciences, which is a spin-out of Aubrey de Grey's previous foundation. And I got into the entire life science field as a result of, being slightly younger than my current self in undergrad and reading his book and inspired to do drug discovery and aging. And so what we do, we're a contract research organization. We support a couple hundred pharmaceutical companies create new drugs that they're moving into human clinical trials for various diseases. And one of the things that we do is we have deep expertise in aging research. And so we partnered with Aubrey de Grey's current foundation, LEV Foundation, to run lifespan studies in mice. So the whole idea and part of the reason that there's so much excitement about the longevity space in general is because we know now that there are interventions that can increase the healthy life expectancy of laboratory animals by 20-30%. And these are animals that are already in mid to late age when interventions began. And so what Aubrey's work is focused on is taking these different interventions and combining them to see what the synergistic effects of those treatments are, because we would expect that that combining interventions would have a greater effect on health and lifespan than any of the interventions individually. So Aubrey and his team have scoured the literature to identify the best possible interventions, ones that we would expect to synergize based on their mechanisms of action. And then our laboratories in Syracuse and Lafayette, New York, are executing the work to test those interventions in laboratory mice as the model.
That's fantastic. So I have a question. What is, and I've heard of this through different sources, can you define or describe longevity escape velocity for me?
I'll leave that over to Aubrey because he coined the term.
Yeah, I just love that. First of all, I love the term. And tell us about it.
Okay. So it all really is a concept that arises from the thing that has defined my work for the past 24 years, namely the realization that slowing aging down is actually not the easiest way to postpone the health problems of late life. That the easiest way is to repair aging, to reverse aging. That sounds very counterintuitive, right? It sounds like obviously reversing is harder than slowing down, but no. Turns out that if you want to slow aging down, you've got to understand the mechanics of aging at the molecular and cellular level really very, very well indeed, and have really incredibly sophisticated tools to somehow disentangle the things that metabolism does that we need it to do to keep us alive from one day to the next, from the things that we'd like it not to do, the creation of damage that eventually makes us sick late in life. I realized that we could just leave metabolism alone and instead dive into preventative maintenance. In the same way that in a car, right? In a car, there's only so much rust that a car can tolerate before the doors fall off. But it can tolerate some rust. So every so often, you just get rid of the rust, right? You just keep it going. And we know that we can do that indefinitely. That's why we have 100-year-old cars today.
Sure.
Now, the thing is, in order to do that, you don't need to understand the chemistry of rusting, right? It's kind of the same kind of thing. There's a huge amount that we don't understand about how the body works. And this is the way of sidestepping all of that ignorance. So why does that come to this thing called longevity escape velocity? Simply because if you're slowing aging down, starting in middle age, then you haven't got much margin of error. You don't need to be living very much longer before you start getting sick, start exhibiting the chronic diseases of late life. We may be able to extend that period. Even if we extended it by a factor of 2, it still wouldn't amount to very many years. Whereas if we are reversing aging, taking someone who's already, let's say, 60 back to being, let's say, biologically 40, then that has bought us time. That person won't be biologically 60 again until they're 80, shall we say, right? And in that, people like me and Kelsey will have been able to grind away and improve the quality of these rejuvenation treatments so that we can re-rejuvenate the same people when they're 80 and biologically 60 for the second time, so that they won't be biologically 60 for the third time until they're, let's say, 110 or whatever, and so on. We can do that indefinitely. So the formal definition of the term longevity escape velocity is the minimum rate at which scientists need to improve the comprehensiveness of rejuvenation treatments against aging in order that people who are getting the best treatments, the state-of-the-art treatments at any time, will stay one step ahead of the problem and never have never have the amount of damage in their body that is necessary to make them sick.
I want that. But we all do. Well, I have a question for you then, for either of you who wants to answer. We have, for example, here in my clinic, through a device we use for resting metabolic rate, VO2 submax, VO2 max testing, a device out of Greece, the Pinoy metabolic tester. And, the doctor upstairs, Joe Barry, he has a way of doing it. I don't know how. We can measure biological age. Do you have a favorite way or a preferred way of finding out our biological age?
All right, I think we probably both have answers to that. Here's my answer. There are lots of ways to estimate biological age. Some of them are very long-standing. VO2 max is part of this, measuring memory, measuring strength, like grip strength, measuring how fast you can walk. Your glucose tolerance, things like that. And these are all good estimates of some aspects of biological age. These days, there's a very fashionable approach, which is to use omics. In other words, to look at, the genome and the epigenome and the proteome and the transcriptome and ask big questions about them. And these are definitely still improving. They're not really there yet. They're not really quite as good in terms of predicting how soon you're going to come down with the chronic conditions of late life as the traditional ones are. But they may get there in due course.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting. Kelsey, any words on that?
I'll take a slightly different approach on that, which is I look at markers of aging in the context of function and what I'm studying. So, if you were to ask me about the health of a company, for example, there are different metrics we can look at the health of a company, but if I'm looking at the health of the economy, I'm using indices. I'm using the stock market as an index to capture the health of a variety of different companies. The same thing happens in the body. So you can use omics to look at certain processes. You can look at clinical biomarkers to look at other processes. As a drug developer, I'm really interested in metrics according to the specific disease states that I'm studying. As an individual, I'm very interested in performance functional tests to evaluate age because I'm, very personally interested in performance endpoints. Whereas, for drug development, I'm interested in different clinically relevant endpoints.
Beautiful. Yeah, really interesting. I'm just so fascinated. So with that said, we're going to go out to a break. We're talking today with Dr. Aubrey de Grey, Dr. Kelsey Moody, and this is really fascinating. I love it. We're going to come back, talk more with them after this short break. Okay, we're back. We're talking about aging. We're talking about longevity, escape velocity. So, gentlemen, I'm curious to know, what time frames are we looking at? Like, I think there would be a high level of interest for listeners to know time frames, however you want to describe this to us.
So my time frames have evolved over the years, of course, as one would expect. But at least I've been giving some. I have been berating my colleagues in the biology of aging for the past 20 odd years for refusing to give predictions of time frames.
Uh-huh.
Their reasons are they don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. And I say, well, that's all very well, but the fact is, the wider world thinks that aging is somehow woven into the fabric of the universe and there's no way we're ever going to be able to do anything about it with medicine. And we all know that that's not correct. So we are, in fact, shooting ourselves in the foot by not giving time frame predictions. Saying that, though, the time frame predictions have to be probabilistic because we're talking about pioneering technology, and of course nobody knows what unanticipated obstacles we're going to come across. So my current time frame is that I think we have a 50-50 chance of getting to longevity escape velocity within the next 12 to 15 years. So that means in the second half of the 2030s. And I'm pleased to say that for the past 10 years, I've been saying pretty much the exact same thing. It hasn't really slipped. I will also say, however, that in the previous 10 years, my time frame slipped dramatically because there was far less money being provided for the research that needed to be done than I had expected to come in. But yes, things have got better, though I will say that the money is very unevenly distributed, and some of the lower-hanging fruit is getting basically all of it, and the stuff that is just as vital but is a little further off is lagging even further as time goes on for lack of funding. So that's a really important point. Nevertheless, though, yes, it's that kind of time frame. Now, I do want to emphasize, though, how speculative this is. And a good way to say that is, okay, how long do I think it's going to be before we're certain to get to longevity escape velocity? And I can't put a number on that. I think there's at least a 5% chance that we won't get there for 100 years. But so the hell what? A 50% chance it's just quite enough to be worth fighting for.
Oh, I see. It is worth noting too, Carl, there are products already going into human clinical trials. They're in human clinical trials that have the potential to start delivering on, the promise of halting age-related processes more globally. One of the conversation for people that do drug development has changed from if this is possible to how do we measure it? Because if we stopped aging completely, absolutely arrested natural aging tomorrow in a treated group versus an untreated group, how long would that clinical trial have to in order for us to see a delta, to see an effect? And so the conversation, at least, as I see it, and with the people that we're talking to, is focused on that question, not a question of whether these technologies are going to work. It's how well do they work, and how do we measure the effectiveness so that we can continue to iterate on and improve those. And that's a distinction that that conversation didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago. That's very new. The amount of resources, the number of pharmaceutical companies, when Aubrey kind of started in this space, there was no one talking about this. There were, a handful of foundations that he created that were doing this sort of work. And in the, 15, 20 years that I've been involved in the space, it's gone from that to, hundreds of companies, and basically every major venture capitalist fund and every major pharmaceutical company is paying attention to this space and is involved in various ways with the development. So I think there's a lot of optimism around Aubrey's predictions. And, the real challenge, I think, operationally is going to be just how do we measure the effectiveness of these treatments in a way we can iterate quickly. In a mouse that only lives 2.5 years, I can see the spread very easily in a very short period of time. Humans that might have 20, 30 years of healthy life expectancy left, measuring that difference is going to be a challenge. And that's, one that we and others are trying to take on.
Well, to me, this is really exciting because I remember talking with my mom sitting on the front porch when I was 5. That's 58 years ago. Telling her, Mom, I am going to live to be 100 years old. Oh, really? Yeah, I am. I'm going to live to be 100 years old. I had no idea that a healthy, functional 100 is what I really wanted. I didn't know about the word functional. And, I just figured that's how I saw myself. I'll be walking around doing stuff, riding my bike, playing games, whatever, when I'm 100. But now I plan to live a lot longer than that. I love being alive. I love my life. I'm very lucky, very blessed, and I want to live a long time. So with that said, this is a high level of interest to me. And one of the things I want to address, if it's all right, is that the pharmaceutical companies oftentimes, in fact, a lot lately, well, decades now, especially the past few years, are getting a really bad rap for causing a lot of trouble. And let's say an over-medicated society in the eyes of certain people out there, experts, doctors, whatever. Yet, and that may be true. I don't know how you see this, but do I see a shift potentially coming where pharmaceuticals are going to help us and actually help us to live longer instead of, let's say suppressing a problem or masking something? Does that make sense?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Gus. You go first.
The problem you're outlining is one that exists, and I think that we need to disentangle the development of drugs and what those drugs are capable of doing versus the delivery and administration of those drugs. At least in the United States, we're in an insurance-based system where preventative medicine, general health, things like that aren't really reimbursable in the same way and aren't really the emphasis. When I go to a doctor, when someone goes to a doctor, it's usually because they're sick or they have something wrong.
Sure.
There's not the typical person probably isn't going to the doctor for, serious maintenance. You might go for, an annual physical to make sure there's nothing egregiously wrong. But a lot of people are, really viewing healthcare as sick care and not looking at it in the context of overall wellness. And that also applies to how medicines are prescribed and reimbursed. At least that's what I observe on my side. I don't know if Aubrey has other thoughts.
Yeah, that's most of what I wanted to say. I think the added things are that we have to see a shift in the kinds of medicines that will be provided from small molecules, pharmaceuticals, into regenerative medicine, cell therapies, gene therapies. Now, a lot of the misunderstanding of the pharmaceutical industry that exists in society is thinking, well, okay, big pharma, the medical industry, they make their money out of sick people. They want to extend sick care rather than health care. They don't really want preventative medicine. But that's not really true. It's the public that don't want preventative medicine because they're very bad at reasoning with uncertainty. And they think that, things that are new and are simply applied to people who are not yet sick is going to hurt them. That's wrong, and it's going to change.
Okay. Yeah, that's real interesting. I'd like to continue that, going on with that thought for a couple of minutes. When we come back, we're going to go to a break. We'll be right back, folks, with more. All right, we're back with Dr. Aubrey de Grey, Dr. Kelsey Moody. Can you continue along the conversation we just had before the break? I just want to learn a little bit more about this.
So I was focusing a moment ago on Big Pharma and the public's misconceptions about Big Pharma's motivations. Yes, Big Pharma currently have a business model that extends sick care rather than extending healthcare with preventative medicine. But the minute that society starts to take preventative medicine more seriously, big pharma will follow the money because ultimately the public are the customers, right? Whether it's through reimbursement of an insurance-based mechanism or whether it's through a single-payer system like in the UK or Europe. Therefore, it's all about educating the public, really. And that comes down to results of the sort that Kelsey and I are working on, early stage stuff that will increase the credibility of the idea that aging can, in the foreseeable future, be brought under comprehensive medical control. At the moment, the fundamental difficulty that humans have is they're terrified of getting their hopes up. They've known that this thing called aging has been out there ever since the dawn of civilization as something that they couldn't escape, and they just, they've been told over and over again that by this or that person that, yes, we figured out the fountain of youth, and everyone's always been wrong. So, of course, there's a certain degree of hesitation in believing the next person who comes along and says they know how to do this. But once the evidence is sufficiently unambiguous, and that is the main purpose of the work that I'm getting Kelsey to do right now, actually, these combination rejuvenation experiments. Once that happens, there's going to be a sea change, a very, very sudden sea change in public attitudes, and that will change absolutely everything, whether it's at the level of the medical industry, of the regulatory regime like the FDA, of public policy in other ways. It's going to be absolutely seismic.
When you talk about public isn't ready or they don't want it, is that because they're expecting a pill for something to just fix what's wrong? Does that have anything to do with it?
I think it's fine to expect a pill. That's what's coming. I mean, well, it got to be a pill, it'll be injections, but that's fine. The fact is, though, they are worried about it doing more harm than good. And of course, they're worried about that at the level of their own health and also at the level of society, because there is a huge amount of irrationality about the impact of bringing aging under medical control, since it would change society a great deal. I've been talking about this on stage and on camera for 20 years, and it's quite frustrating that I'm still having to give the same elementary answers to the same elementary misunderstandings. But here we are.
Well, I have to tell you that you just opened up a whole bunch of aha moments for me. Your book did too, but talking with you and to listen to both of you articulate what you're telling us and sharing is like it falls into the wheelhouse partially of things I didn't know I could know. And that's always the stuff I like to know. It's just things I didn't know I could know about. And it just happened to me. So thank you for that. Now, what are some actionable steps we can do as individuals to, let's say, live longer?
So I'm afraid I have a rather unsatisfactory but nevertheless true answer to this question.
Sure.
Which is that at the moment, the things that we can do, whether it's, supplements or, new fashionable regimes, are very, very ineffective. They do almost nothing. And worse than that, even to the extent that they do anything, different things are right for different people. So basically, over and above just living the way your mother told you to and, not smoking and not getting seriously overweight and so on, there's very little indeed, which means that the real answer to the question is you've got to work to hasten the arrival of things that don't yet exist, that nobody can do, even if they've got a lot of money, because they don't exist, right? So how do we hasten that? Oh, one way we can do it is what you're doing right now, interviewing the experts, getting the audience educated, getting the public to understand the nature of the thing and how close we are to actually doing something about it. And the other way, if one happens to have a lot of money, is to give it to me. And then, of course, there's also the possibility of, if you're a young scientist wanting to help in that way, the way Kelsey was, figuring out the best way to be most impactful in the actual research. All of these things are ways to do it, and everybody can be an advocate. Everybody can talk to their friends, their family, their colleagues, and raise the quality of understanding of this and raise enthusiasm for it.
And on the patient level too, I think advocating for your health, when I was in medical school, everything was really taught on a systems basis, right? If you had age-related, heart issues, you would go see a cardiologist. If you had age-related, neural issues, you would go see like a neurologist. And medicine was trained by organ system. What we're seeing now is we understand that these very disparate age-related diseases are tied molecularly, and the next generation of drugs are going to be able to address multiple age-related diseases independently. And so as patients, we need to understand that. We need to be engaging with multiple physicians in their areas of specialization. There's a lot of clinics and physicians now that are looking very holistically at health. They are, doing all manner of different functional assessments and measurements, because at the end of the day, I think the goal of people right now should be to, yes, hasten the arrival of these sorts of technologies, but also keep themselves in the best possible health so that they maximize the likelihood that they can take advantage of those technologies when they arrive. And, for me personally and, people that I talk to, that's the recommendation is, stay educated so you know what things are on the horizon and do things that you can to maximize your health, as I'm sure has been, discussed ad nauseum with everyone else that you've had on your show and, can weigh in on those sorts of topics.
Well, one second. I'm breaking for just a moment because I'm going to edit this out. I forgot to ask when we get done. So we have about 3 minutes left. And what I'm wondering is, after this, do you have time? Do you want to go into an extra 5, 8, 10 minutes max? We'll get you out by 10 or more sooner. Just to go a little overtime with this. I do a little overtime section sometimes. That goes on YouTube. Or do you want to?
Yeah, sure, we can do that.
Okay, all right. So this is a 45-second break. Right, I'll figure it out. Well, gentlemen, this is one of the most fascinating discussions I've ever had in all the interviews I've done, and that's hundreds now. I'm just so excited about all that you're sharing with me. And folks, to listeners out there, if you go to carlsterling.net, Carl with a K, after this segment ends, after the show is off the air, you can hear just a few more minutes of Dr. de Grey, Dr. Moody, and me talking a little bit further, okay? So be sure to go there and check it out. Gentlemen, I'm just curious, how did the two of you connect?
Well, Kelsey could tell that story, I think.
Sure. I was an undergrad studying in upstate New York. I'm from the Plattsburgh area originally, and read Aubrey's book in undergrad and decided that sounded kind of crazy, this idea that we could bring aging under medical control. So I decided that I was going to study biochemistry and medicine and science and dedicate my professional life to trying to build companies that could hasten the delivery of those technologies. And as soon as it became clear to me that that wasn't possible, I would go do something else with my life. And that was in 2008.
Wow.
And several degrees and, a couple companies and so on later. I'm a professional drug developer. I worked with Aubrey for a few years at his previous foundation, spun my company out from, his group, and we've been building for the last 10 years in Central New York, developing these sorts of technologies.
Well, that's fantastic, guys. I love this. So, gentlemen,
I want to amplify that a little, because one thing that Kelsey did at the beginning of his time with me was he initiated our education initiative, which has been a really, really valuable way to get people involved, typically as summer students who come for like 1 or 2 months as interns into the laboratory. It started out when Kelsey began it just as kind of making literature reviews, but it's led to the creation of a lot of people in this community who have made a lot of difference. So Kelsey's definitely not just one of my proteges, he's got plenty of his own.
Man, I love it. This has been fabulous, guys. Really, really appreciate you joining us. We're just about the end of the hour here. Gentlemen, if you had in, let's say, 15 seconds or less, each of you, do you have a takeaway message for the listeners?
Let's figure out how to save some lives. Let's save them as quickly as we can.
I like that. Kelsey?
I think everyone actually has the ability to contribute. And to Aubrey's earlier point, if you're a student looking for opportunities in the space, you can reach out to us. We know people and we can make connections and support that. If you're just an individual, you can become educated on these things. You can talk to your friends, and, people need to understand that these technologies are coming and should be, getting excited about it.
Beautiful. Thanks again, guys. Appreciate you joining me so much. We're talking about ending aging. a book by Dr. Aubrey de Grey. You're listening to Your Health Matters. And if you go to carlsterling.net, Carl with a K, you can watch Overtime. We'll go an extra few minutes. Thanks for listening, everyone, and have a great day. All right. So we're in the overtime section here, and really great to talk with both of you. Kelsey, I'd love to know more about the work you're doing.
Well, maybe Aubrey could outline the experimental nature and kind of the future direction he wants to go into, and I'm happy to weigh in on specifics with the study as appropriate.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so basically the study that Kelsey's doing, which started early last year and is a few months away from concluding, involves taking 1,000 mice and giving them various combinations of 4 different treatments, each of which has individually been shown by other groups over the years to somewhat extend lifespan in mice, even if only initiated in middle age. And the idea of the experiment is to put them all together in the same mice at the same time and see whether we can get more than the sum of the parts. And, well, long and short of it is we are doing pretty well here. We're pretty happy with the results, even though, as I say, the experiment's not complete yet. However, the results are not the, knocking it out of the park kind of results that we're ultimately aiming for. What we'd like to do is to take mice that are in middle age. So that basically means 1.5 years old, when they would normally live to about 2.5 on average. And we'd like to get them to live to 3.5 on average. In other words, we'd like to double their remaining lifespan starting from when the study begins. The best that's ever been done is about 3 or 4 months increase in lifespans when you start there. We think we're going to beat that, though not by much.
Okay.
But we are pretty happy with that, and we definitely feel that we've validated the belief that we had in starting all of this work, that these are the right experiments to be doing right now. And not just the right experiments, they are the single most valuable experiments that could be done in the whole of biology of aging, in terms of the amount of information we could acquire per dollar spent. And not just information, but also impact, rhetorical information, if you like, the ability to actually get the public to sit up and take notice and realize that they can no longer cling to the idea that aging is immutable.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. For me, this is mind-boggling because I've never spoken with anyone who's actually, doing this kind of work. I don't know if anybody else is, but to think that you're actually, you hear about, here's what it is for me. I hear about experiments, I hear about the mice, the labs and all that, but you're telling us what's going on and what your goals are. It's really, really cool. So Kelsey, you said the lab's down in Lafayette.
Yeah, our labs, our headquarters is based in Syracuse, New York, and the mouse facility where this work is being done is in Lafayette. And, you think about these sorts of studies in the same way that, you're treating potentially, very elderly, geriatric, fragile people. The same thing applies to the mice. So how do we, administer treatments and things where they might need multiple rounds of treatment? It's difficult to explain to the mice that these interventions have all been shown to increase their healthy lifespan individually, and we're trying to combine them to make these mice live longer and healthier and happier than any mouse that has come before them. But unfortunately, we can't have those conversations, right? So there's all manner of different handling considerations that go into that. With elderly patients, we can take blood samples and look at different biomarkers and see how they're doing. Mice, that stresses them out a lot, and they have a much larger blood volume than humans do. So the designs of how frequently we can test them, the goal of not stressing them out, because if we stress them out too much, that could convolute the positive effects that we're trying to see from the treatments. So all these sorts of design considerations, really play into, the practical application of the sorts of treatments that we're trying to combine for this study, and has made for a very complex but highly satisfying set of experiments. And to Aubrey's point, we are seeing that there's positive effects of combining these treatments, and that really is encouraging that, if we continue to try different interventions strategically, we can find a combination that will significantly outperform anything that's been previously prescribed. And I should also know, to Aubrey's point also, all of these treatments are things that we would reasonably expect would directly translate to human beings. So we're not doing genetic manipulations or things like that wouldn't be applicable to people. And I think that's an important point for listeners to understand as well.
Sir, that must be quite a task. I mean, you have 1,000 mice, so you need to identify them, you need to know who they are, and
they all
measure their progress.
Yep, and we have a whole veterinary staff that's checking these animals every single day, making sure that they're happy and healthy. Just like old people can get sick, old mice can get sick as well. They need supportive care. They need, the monitoring. But again, those mice can be stressed out very easily. So how do we do that in the most non-invasive way possible? And collecting all the information, and that's what we do.
That's fantastic. And Dr. de Grey, what else is on the horizon? For both of you, what do you see in the future, even further beyond? I mean, we've talked about a lot of stuff here. One question I have right off the top of my head is, do you have any more books coming out?
I wish I had time. That hasn't worked out so far. But no, my first goal is to do a lot more experiments of the exact same type that we're doing here. Maybe with more than 4 interventions combined, maybe with different doses of the same interventions, but most likely with different interventions. We have a lot of things in our list, things that are individually very promising and deserve to be included in a study like this. And we believe that if we were able to do as many studies like this as we could think of, we would be able to get to that goal of extending average lifespan and maximum lifespan of these mice by an additional year within 3 or 4 years from now. And that, I believe, is the route one to bringing aging under proper control.
That's great. So let's close out with this. If people want to support your work, how do they go about doing that?
Well, my foundation, levf.org, which I'm sure you'll put in the show notes, has a nice friendly donate button on the homepage. And honestly, for most people, that is the simplest way to do it. These experiments are expensive, and we can't kick them off until we've got enough money in the bank to be able to pay for them, not least because the nature of the experiments is that a large majority of the money has to be spent right at the beginning.
And what's that website? What's that website again?
levf.org. Longevity, E for escape, V for velocity, F for foundation.org.
Okay, great. And I'm going to have a link to that in the description of everything. So, very good. Yeah, I love this, man. Fantastic. Guys, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it. I wish you all the best in what you're doing, and let's continue to stay in touch, maybe support the work further somehow. Everyone who's listening, thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate it, and have a fantastic day.